It started with something so small most people would have ignored it. A flower pot sitting quietly on a porch. But in this neighborhood, under the iron grip of a ruthless HOA president, even the color of a flower pot could spark war. Within days, the simple choice of decoration turned into a nightmare. Letters, fines, threats whispered across fences. And then, the homeowner did something no one expected, something that would shake the entire community and leave neighbors divided like never before. What could possibly turn a quiet suburban street into a battlefield? Meet Daniel and Lisa Carter, a hard-working couple in their mid-40s with 2 children, Ethan, age 10, and Mia, age 8. For years, they dreamed of escaping the cramped apartment life of the city and finally buying a home where their kids could ride bikes freely, play in the yard, and make memories of childhood that wouldn't be bound by 4 walls. When they first saw the charming brick house at the end of Willow Creek Lane, they thought they had found it. The neighborhood looked like something out of a postcard. Freshly trimmed hedges, colorful gardens, families walking their dogs in the evening. It seemed safe, quiet, and exactly what they had been searching for. Sure, there was an HOA, but Daniel and Lisa figured that wasn't a bad thing. After all, weren't homeowners associations supposed to keep neighborhoods clean and orderly? At the time, it seemed like a small price to pay for the peace of mind and stability they wanted for their family. For the first few months, life was blissfully ordinary. Daniel went to work at his accounting job. Lisa volunteered at the local school and tended to her small vegetable garden. Ethan made friends with the boy next door, while Mia found herself endlessly fascinated by the family's new dog, Max. On weekends, the Carters hosted small barbecues and began to feel like they belonged. But in the shadows of that picture-perfect neighborhood, a tension quietly stirred, one that would soon erupt into conflict. Because behind every HOA, there's leadership. And in Willow Creek, that leadership came in the form of Margaret Hensley, the HOA president. Margaret was in her late 60s, sharp-eyed, and always patrolling the neighborhood with a clipboard in hand. She claimed she was only protecting property values, but most residents knew she thrived on control. What Daniel and Lisa didn't know, as they smiled politely at Margaret during their first community meeting, was just how far she was willing to go to maintain that control. The first warning sign came one evening when Lisa planted a row of bright marigolds along the edge of the walkway. The next day, she found a letter tucked under her doormat. Your flower selection does not conform to the HOA's approved color palette. Please remove them immediately to avoid fines. Lisa laughed it off at first. Surely it was just a misunderstanding. But as the weeks went by, the letters piled up. Complaints about the color of the mailbox, the length of the grass, even the type of bird feeder hanging from the porch. Each one carried a veiled threat: comply or pay up. The Carters were about to learn that Willow Creek wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a battlefield, and Margaret Hensley ruled it like a kingdom. At first, Daniel tried to keep the peace. He figured it was easier to trim the grass an extra half-inch or repaint the mailbox than to make enemies with the HOA. But with each passing week, the demands became more absurd. One morning, Lisa woke up to find an official notice taped to their front door. Violation number 47. Unauthorized children's toys in yard. Ethan's basketball hoop, which stood at the edge of the driveway, was apparently unsightly. The HOA demanded its immediate removal or face a $200 fine. Lisa's hands shook as she read the notice. They can't be serious. It's just a basketball hoop. But Margaret was dead serious. And she wasn't stopping there. The Carters started receiving fines for the most trivial things. Trash cans visible from the street for more than 15 minutes after pickup, a garden hose left uncoiled, even chalk drawings on the sidewalk Mia had made. It was as if every move the family made was being watched. Neighbors whispered that Margaret had spies, residents who secretly reported violations in exchange for favor. Tension grew inside the Carter household. Daniel began to dread coming home, knowing there would likely be another letter, another warning, another fine. Lisa felt her once beloved home was turning into a prison. The kids sensed the stress too. their laughter replaced by whispered questions. "Are we in trouble, Mom?" The breaking point came when Margaret announced at a community meeting that the Carters' vegetable garden, a small patch of tomatoes, peppers, and herbs, was in violation of HOA landscaping rules. "Vegetable gardens," Margaret declared to the crowd, "belong in the backyard out of public view. This is a neighborhood, not a farm." Lisa stood up, her voice trembling but fierce. "This is my home. That garden is for my family. Who are you to say we can't grow our own food?" Margaret's thin smile sent a chill through the room. "The rules are the rules, Mrs. Carter. Remove it or face consequences." The Carters refused. Days later, they were hit with fines totaling over $1,000. That's when Daniel knew they couldn't keep quiet any longer. The Carters began documenting everything, every letter, every fine, every absurd demand. They started talking to other neighbors and discovered they weren't alone. Families had been bullied, harassed, even threatened with foreclosure over petty violations. Fear kept most residents silent, but behind closed doors, resentment toward Margaret's reign was brewing. One neighbor, an elderly widow named Mrs. Thompson, revealed that Margaret had fined her $500 for hanging wind chimes that clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic. Another, a young couple, had been forced to tear down a treehouse for their children after being threatened with legal action. The Carters realized they were facing more than just petty harassment. They were standing against a system built to intimidate and control. Daniel and Lisa decided to fight back, but Margaret wasn't going to let them go without a war. And war was exactly what came next. The final showdown began quietly with a certified letter in the mail. The HOA was threatening to place a lien on the Carters' home if they didn't pay the mounting fines. If the lien went unpaid, foreclosure could follow. Their dream home, the life they had built for their children, was on the line. Lisa broke down in tears, clutching the letter. Daniel's jaw clenched with a resolve he'd never felt before. They weren't just fighting for their house. They were fighting for their dignity. Armed with months of documentation, the Carters contacted an attorney. What they discovered stunned them. Many of Margaret's rules weren't even legally enforceable. Worse, she had been misusing HOA funds for years, charging residents fines while using the money for personal expenses. The attorney encouraged them to take it public, and so they did. At the next HOA meeting, the Carters arrived not with timid voices, but with evidence. Daniel stood before the crowd holding up copies of Margaret's letters, invoices, and even receipts proving she had used HOA money to fund a personal vacation. Gasps filled the room as the truth unraveled. Lisa spoke next, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "We moved here to build a home, not to live in fear. Margaret has turned this neighborhood into her kingdom, and it's time we take it back." The room erupted. Neighbors who had been silent for years finally found their voices. Stories poured out, tales of bullying, of unfair fines, of humiliation. It became clear that the Carters weren't just fighting their battle. They had ignited a rebellion. Margaret's face turned pale as she realized her grip was slipping. For the first time, the iron-fisted president was on the defensive. She tried to shout them down, to declare their evidence inadmissible, but the crowd wasn't listening. By the end of the meeting, a vote was called. Margaret was removed as HOA president in a landslide decision. But the war wasn't quite over. Margaret, furious at her downfall, threatened to sue the Carters personally. The attorney stood firm, assuring the Carters they had the law on their side. It was the peak of tension, the point where everything hung in the balance. For months they had been pushed, bullied, and threatened. But now, finally, the tide had turned. And in that moment, Daniel and Lisa realized they weren't just survivors. They were the reason the neighborhood had hope again. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek felt like a different place. The oppressive cloud that had loomed over every home seemed to lift. Residents smiled more freely, kids played in the yards without fear of being fined, and laughter returned to the streets. Margaret, stripped of her title and exposed for her corruption, quietly sold her home and left the neighborhood. Some whispered she moved to a nearby town, but to the Carters it didn't matter. She no longer had power over them, or anyone else. The HOA underwent sweeping changes. New leadership was elected, neighbors who genuinely cared about the community. Rules were simplified, unnecessary fines were abolished, and a sense of fairness was restored. The Carters' vegetable garden thrived in the front yard, a symbol of resilience and victory. But the impact went deeper than policy changes. The neighborhood, once divided by fear, was now united by shared struggle. Residents who had once kept their heads down found themselves standing taller, willing to speak out when something felt wrong. The Carters had shown them what courage looked like. For Daniel and Lisa, the experience left scars, but also strength. They had come dangerously close to losing everything, but in the process, they had discovered just how powerful ordinary people can be when they refuse to bow to intimidation. Late one summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and fireflies lit up the yard, Daniel sat on the porch with Lisa by his side. Ethan and Mia played basketball in the driveway, their laughter echoing into the night. Lisa leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder and whispered, "We did it. We really did it." Daniel squeezed her hand, his eyes fixed on their children. "No one will ever take this away from us again." The Carter story spread beyond Willow Creek. Friends, relatives, even strangers who heard it took away the same powerful lesson. Sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought on distant fields or in courtrooms, but right outside our front doors. And when faced with unfairness, with cruelty disguised as authority, one family's courage can spark a change that lasts far beyond their own fence line. Because in the end, home isn't just a place. It's a promise worth fighting for.